Delighted to be here. I caught maybe a slight error. I thought you said I had only been retired for 2 years. But actually, it's been more like 10. Okay. I don't write that fast. And I've addressed this August organization before, about 4 or 5 years ago on Elisha Green in your lovely meeting house downtown. As you know, Sallie is from this neck of the woods. I'm a little unclear exactly where she was born, but I do know that after her birth, then she was raised in what I think you all call the Shropshire House. Does it go by that name? It was, yeah. Now it's known. It's Shriver. No, that's right. That's right. We talked about that. Which is on your main drag opposite the college. It's changed in its looks a lot, so it really doesn't look like it did. And in 1838, her father, very well-to-do, Robert Ward, built a mansion in downtown Louisville, which is, alas, no longer there. And so she was born in 1827 and was always known as a beautiful child and a talented girl. Farmers would have a prize lamb or heifer or calf, or rather, and if it was especially excellent in its genre, he would say, "Oh, it's a real Sallie Ward." And I thought, well, that's one of those stories, that totally myth. But in fact, I looked at the, I'm trying to think of the name of the author, but the written in the 1880s, the history of Scott, Bourbon, Nicholas County. Yeah, William Perry, or Perrin. And he recorded, or rather someone recorded for him, because the ends of his chapters are actually written by other people who paid to be in the book. You can't always trust it. But a farmer had a prize cow. He had several generations of prize cows that would win prizes at the agricultural fair. And those cows' names were Sallie Ward 1, Sallie Ward 2, Sallie Ward the 3rd. So, not to mention supposedly racehorses. There was one that was racing at Metairie down in New Orleans at the time that she was famous here, called Sallie Ward, spelled with a Y instead of an I-E. I'm happy to be standing here. I was able to get permission from the Speed Museum to put a photograph that they provided kindly of the original of that on the cover of my book, plus a number of other portraits taken at the same time, which was March or April of 1860, in the painter, whose name was Healy, in his studio in New Orleans. And I could tell you a little bit about that. He made at least 7 portraits, and there survives a price list that for his customers, and it depends on the size of the painting. And I calculated that Sallie's father spent on these 7 paintings about $2,800, which you multiply by 30 to get a sense of how much it's worth today. So it's not incredible, but it's good to have a hard figure there. Sallie by then was in her early 30s because it was 1860. She was born in 1827, so she was 33. She had lost some of her youthful glow, but was still of striking appearance. Her cousin, Margaret Johnson Irwin, who lived in Mississippi and was familiar with the Wards who built this house, who lived down there, commented on the painting, this one you're looking at. Her portrait by Healy is very pretty, but it seems to simper. So that's the definition of simpering. Uh, a 20th century art historian commenting on the painting talks about her impish qualities as revealed in the painting and her coquettishness. That's not surprising. He said the painter captured the malapertness. I hadn't seen that word in a while. Malapert-ness of the successful social hostess in the tilt of the head, the knowing glance, and the artfully artless clasp of the hands. I'm sure she studied what to do with her hands for a long time, unless Healy thought of it. The painter relied, quoting this 20th century commentator, on quantities of yard goods. Look at all that cloth, including on the table behind her, such as the moiré and re-embroidered lace of the gown and the damask of the table covering, to create an extraordinary visual richness, as French painters such as Ingres had done in the preceding decade, unquote. As for the painter himself, he kept a copy of it in his studio in Paris, France, and he showed visitors the painting and said that Sallie was the most beautiful and the most exquisite woman I have ever painted. A letter in the Filson Historical Society archives gives us a glimpse of how she might have looked in her prime, say 15 years earlier, 1845 maybe. Well, in fact, it was, definitely. It was a letter written in December of 1845 by Henry Clay Pindell, who wrote to John C. Bullitt. So it's, guy talk. By George, when Sallie Ward's face is in repose, she is the most perfect beauty I ever saw. Lord, what would I have given to have kissed her for about an hour? All over. The face, of course. The face, of course. I went with her one night to a concert, and I don't think I took my eyes off her for 10 minutes the whole time. So she had many boyfriends. Duels were fought in her honor, I think generally in New Orleans rather than, but here too perhaps. There's a story that I don't know is true or not. It was told in the 1880s, which was not long after, she was not dead yet, by a columnist, a woman who was a social columnist for a paper in Alabama, and she tells the tale of, how did it go? Sallie was at a dance in the St. Charles Hotel, I think, in New Orleans, which was the place to be. She was involved in, maybe not that involved, with another young man who wanted to see her, but she didn't want to talk to him because she was dancing. And so he went out and fought a duel and died, and she learned of it the next day. That sort of stuff. It could have been invented out of jealousy about her. Who knows? The house that Robert Ward had built for her, and I found, by the way, at least I could find a little scrap of new material in writing my book, an ad in a Louisville newspaper a few years before 1838 for a piece of property precisely on the northeast corner of I think 2nd and Walnut for sale, and that's where the house was built. So he responded to the property ad and built the house. He was perhaps the wealthiest man in Kentucky, Robert J. Ward. The mansion that housed him and his wife and their 8 offspring, 4 daughters, 4 sons, together with its stables, slave quarters, and park-like grounds, occupied the northeast corner of, as I said, the intersection of Walnut and 2nd. The building was made for entertaining, and Ward had supervised its design. Hundreds of guests could mill about and not feel confined. It had 3 parlors in a row, 20 by 22 feet in size, connected by folding doors. From the third, glass doors open onto a greenhouse, and beyond that, a conservatory with palms, camellias, and in the center, a pyramid of rare flowers reaching to the ceiling. Nearby was an aviary with 100 caged birds, set loose at intervals to drink from the pool and the fountain constantly flowing through a miniature tin castle. For luncheons, tables of massive mahogany were brought in with silver plate and cut glass, together with rounds of mutton, whole turkeys, sirloins of beef, saddles of venison, pyramids of oranges, grapes, and macaroons. All beneath a spun candy web, wine flowed like water. And we know that because when she finally got married to Timothy Bigelow Lawrence, December 6, 1848, in that house, a reporter from the Boston Post, I think it was, came to Louisville and fought his way through the crowd outside. There were about 500 people there to witness the affair, witness the wedding, witness the dinner afterward, and describe in some detail what the inside of the house looked like. The outside of the house, and I have a drawing of it from 3 very blurry newspaper photographs, but the drawing is very clear, did not show it to be all that impressive. Nothing like this structure here. But inside was where the magnificence was. To maintain that lifestyle, Robert Ward spent $50,000 a year, multiplied by 30, equivalent to $1.5 million today. Born in 1798 in Scott County, and his portrait used to be over there. It's probably on another wall here. It's still there? Okay. In Scott County, he was descended through his mother, Sallie Johnson Ward, from a wealthy and powerful family. His maternal grandparents were Robert and Jemima Suggett Johnson. You've heard of Jemima, who, according to legend, had led the women and girls out of a frontier Fort Culpeper Station to fetch water in the face of imminent attack from British soldiers and their Native American allies. When the enemy subsequently shot blazing arrows into the fort, the water saved the day. No account of Sallie Ward is complete without the tale of her riding a horse through the market house located in the middle of a street in Louisville. It's just the kind of legend that I thought was a legend, but I have found evidence of it. Upsetting fruits and vegetables and sending sellers and buyers fleeing for safety. The building had been erected in the middle of a street and had openings at both ends, a tempting target for a spirited young woman approaching it on horseback, especially when egged on by one of her male companions. The story, as historian Thomas Clark has remarked, is one that Kentuckians have not yet ceased telling. Another Sallie story is her riding her horse up the front steps of the Galt House, that hotel, and into the lobby and whirling the horse about and making it bow to each of the startled guests. Eugene Field, if that name is familiar, you remember Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. He wrote children's poems, but he was also a newspaper columnist in Chicago, and he talked about it later, not at the time. A Louisville correspondent for the New York World in 1885 called it a legend, but identified every member of the accompanying quartet of friends in the Galt House episode, which makes me think, well, maybe it did happen. But a further instance of her ability to make mischief was when she and a friend disguised themselves as beggars and so played upon the credulity of her parents that she prevailed on them to give her a goodly sum of money. They didn't know it was her, thought it was a beggar. While attending a private girls' school in Philadelphia, she one day put on male clothing and showed up among her fellow students in a place where only females were allowed. They screamed and fled. She laughed and told them to come back. It was only her. And they did, and they noticed how handsome she looked in male attire. She graduated from that school in 1844. She did not make a habit of cross-dressing, but she did something similar, that is, she would walk around Louisville smoking a cigar and walking with a cane, imitating Georges Sand, who had done it in Paris. I'm going to jump ahead a second to tell why I said a little earlier. I think there's some indication of proof for the horse through the market house story. There are two. One is that a man who lived to be 100 years old and was born in 1829 and was interviewed in 28, 29, said he heard about it. It was the talk of the town when it happened. And he would have been, if he was born in 1829, about 16 at the time. It was probably 1845. But maybe more convincing is that at least it was talked about. I mean, it's talked about now, as Thomas Clark said, Kentuckians have not stopped talking about it. But it was talked about in 1850. And it could have occurred, say, 1845, because in 1850 in a New York newspaper, there was coverage of, and I have to jump ahead, step on my own feet here because I don't have 6 hours to tell you the story. But she eventually married Timothy Bigelow Lawrence of Boston and divorced him. And I'll tell you that in a minute, but let me jump ahead just to the newspaper covering the divorce, which occurred in June of 1850. And this New York newspaper made the contrast between culture in Louisville and culture in Boston. And he put it in terms not of North and South, but of East and West. And said that a Puritan adolescent young lady of Boston would never disturb anyone as she walked down the street, whereas a woman of Louisville would ride her horse through the market and only stop to pay a fine at the end. So Sallie was his typical Western woman, and that was in June of 1850, just after he talked about her divorce, which was eagerly granted by a jury in Louisville, of men, of course. They said, we don't want to go to the jury room. We've already decided. She gets it. But I'm going to trip over myself because I'm going to also see how the divorce happened before. Well, no, I'm not going to trip over myself that much. I'm going to talk about the marriage and then the divorce. The marriage seemed to be made at least on Wall Street, if not in heaven, because both were wealthy. The Lawrence family owned cotton mills in Massachusetts, and Robert Johnson raised cotton in Mississippi and Arkansas. He and sold it. He made his money mainly from selling it. And so, it seemed to be, like hand to glove. However, Sallie was in the habit of shocking people by wearing rouge. It is not a big deal now. And it wasn't a big deal in the 18th century, when even men wore rouge. If you look at the history of it, I was astounded. But then if you read, British authors of 1770s, 1780s, you see that happening. Anyway, it was not done in America, except by Sallie Ward on the streets of Louisville. One time she passed a couple of men working, probably city employees, digging a hole or filling it up, and one of the men said to the other, "Painted, by God." Assuming, he's referring to her, she turned around and she said, "Yes, painted, by God," but which wasn't true because, she used paint. But her beauty was, God-given. However, this caused a problem in the Lawrence household, especially with her mother-in-law, Timothy Bigelow Lawrence's mother, who told her son to put down his foot on this and make her not wear it. And then she wrote to her mother and said, "Oh, they're making me not letting me wear, etc." And the mother wrote back and said, "Be a woman, do what you want, wear it. Just don't wear so much they could tell." But I don't know if they picked up on her wearing it, but there was that. There was an episode that I think caused her to leave, and it wasn't the rouge, nor was it what had been later but incorrectly described, say, in the 20th century as her wearing bloomers. That was impossible because they had not been invented for another couple of years. But she was indeed, as she'd done earlier in 1946 at a masquerade ball, a ball, not a masquerade ball in Newport, Rhode Island, that made her famous. Turkish outfit, like Turkish pantalettes and silk slippers. And basically the pantalettes were, like trousers. And that was the kind of costume she wore to a ball in Boston. And they thought, "Oh, this is terrible. It's like wearing rouge and lipstick. It's just not done. It's not done in Boston." A lot of things that at that time were not done in Boston. When I lived in Boston later, they were done. But that's not what made her pack her bags and leave. What made her pack her bags and leave was that she went with her husband to spend a week or so in Massachusetts, where she was already, but at a seaside place. And there was a man, and I think I know who it is. I think it's John Throckmorton, who was a son of the Throckmorton who ran the Galt House, who was always in love with her and followed her to Boston according to legend. Anyway, there was a man who was involved in this. But what happened was that she was staying at a hotel, and her husband said, "Want to go for a ride in carriage with me?" And she said, "No, it's too cold." It was August, but it can be cold by the seaside in that part of the world. So he said, okay. So he went on his own. And then some lady friends of hers came and said, "Why don't you go with us for a ride?" She says, "Well, no, I told my husband I couldn't go, and I didn't want to catch cold and so forth." And they said, "Well, this is a closed carriage. We close the doors and the windows, and you won't feel anything." She said, "Okay." So she went. But then it turns out there was a man with them, and that was Throckmorton, I think. But that's another story. And so they're riding down the street, these two ladies, and three ladies, counting Sallie and Throckmorton, and in a carriage. And guess who they pass? Timothy Bigelow Lawrence. And he makes them stop, and he opens the door, and he pulls Sallie out, and he yells at her, and so forth. Where at that point, the man, which I think is Throckmorton, ducked out and got into Lawrence's carriage and drove off. And the way that he boxed her ears later in the hotel room made her telegraph her father to come get her, which he did in mid-August of 1849. And then she comes back to Louisville and starts seeing men, not deeply, but going out to parties, meeting men, and writing to people, to friends, and saying, "Well, we're having great balls and parties." So she was, and there was a woman who was the wife of a Yale professor of chemistry who was visiting in Louisville, and I found a letter she wrote back home at this time from Louisville. She was visiting Louisville, and she said, this woman, this Sallie Ward Lawrence is really something. If I had a husband, who was left behind in Boston, I don't think I would forget about him. I might forget I was married and fall in love with someone else. So thus she was correctly perceived by other people. The story of her life could be told in four parts, or five, one before marriage, and then the four husbands. I could briefly talk about them because they're all really interesting. This first husband was just a total loser in her eyes, and I think her parents put her up to it. Parents will do that maybe if there's money involved, and until you marry and divorce the first time, you aren't aware what mistake you're making. The second was probably her best marriage. She married Robert Pearson Hunt, thank you. Son of John Wesley Hunt, who was maybe the first millionaire in Kentucky, and who had 12 children, and a descendant, that is his sister, Robert Pearson Hunt. Her son was John Hunt Morgan, and that will come up in the story. But the parents had died before before they married, but the rest of the family was still opposed, and so Robert Hunt said to his family, or to his extended family, his sisters and brothers, okay, I know you don't. I'm not going to invite you to the wedding because you don't want me to marry her, but I'd rather go to hell with Sallie Ward than to heaven without her. So it's noble and romantic. They soon moved to New Orleans and had a house on Rampart Street that, as you were saying, they had splendiferous parties. The music for the dinner parties was provided by the orchestra of the French Opera. They had a French opera in New Orleans that was quite good. There were fountains in the courtyard, or that would cool the air because it's kind of hot down there. It was really something, and that went on for about 8 years. It went on quite well, and it was going on when this portrait was painted. But at the time this portrait was painted, her father, who had built a steamboat for himself in Jeffersonville, Indiana, across from Louisville, called the Robert J. Ward, that was a luxurious craft and could make a round trip down to New Orleans each month, like a 6-day voyage each way, or maybe 2 a month. But however, by 1860, when this painting was made, the railroads were threatening the steamship industry, and of course, when the Civil War came, that killed the cotton trade, at least as far as Robert Johnson Ward was concerned. And so he had tried to sell the steamboat and was unable even to unload it until he sold it off in pieces. But in the description in getting ready to sell it for auction in, say, 1860, 1861, you can see how beautiful the pieces of the interior of that steamboat were. So I think at that moment, who knows, he may have been suffering financially, but in fact I know for a fact that he was, but he nevertheless paid the money to have these portraits made of not only Sallie, but her brothers, or at least one brother, and whose name was Matthews. They generally called him Matt. He was older than her by a year, and he was involved, and had been involved already by that time in 1860. He was involved in 1853 in a very unfortunate tragedy that I think her mother put him up to, his mother. He had 2 little brothers, Victor and William, who I think were twins because they were born in the same year. And they were in a school called the Louisville High School, which was a private school, just a couple blocks from their house. And they were punished, corporal punishment, as were probably almost all the other students, because that was such a common thing to do. for misbehaving in class. In this case, the crime was eating chestnuts or walnuts that then fall onto the floor during class. They can do that in between classes, but not during. And so he was hit with on the leg by the teacher with a kind of leather strap. And the other students testified, well, most of the blows hit him on his boots, so he didn't feel them. And I received the same 6 blows, and I'm still here to tell the tale. It's not a big deal. But he came home crying and cried that he was embarrassed in front of the other students for having been punished. I think there's a taste of the fact that you use a whip on a slave, and so it was like putting him in the position of a real inferior. And he said that to Matt, and Matt's parents their parents were not home, but they came back the next day. And when they came back, the mother insisted that Matt go down and confront this teacher and make him apologize. So Matt did. But first he made a stop at a gun store and bought 2 Derringers and put one in each pocket of his pants. And when he got to the school and they were having class, he tried to pick a fight with the teacher, who was too intelligent to fall for that. But nevertheless, he claimed that when the teacher gently put a hand on his shoulder to say, now, that don't be so upset, it's not a big deal, he pulled out one of his Derringers and shot him, and he died that night. And his older brother, Robert, kept the other students at bay by flashing a Bowie knife at them. So he was about as guilty as Matthew. So they were held in city prison that happened early November '53, through December and January and so forth. The trial was held in Elizabethtown, the father thinking that a different jury pool might get them off, and indeed it did. He hired the best lawyers he could afford, and he got off on self-defense. Of course, it's not really a case of self-defense, but that was the deal. And that was in April of '54, and when the family returned to Louisville, they found that the Louisville population had learned of the miscarriage of justice and were very angry. And thousands of them were meeting in front of City Hall and drawing up resolutions, and a couple of thousand went to their house and threw stones at it and carried figures in effigy of Robert and Matt and set them on fire and threw them on the front porch of the house, and the fire department came and put out the fire, and the conservatory was greatly damaged, the room in the back of the house. And Robert fled, and supposedly, according to a letter that I found in the Filson archives, written in 1948 or 49 to a person who had given a talk, I think about the school teacher. He said, well, you know how he escaped? He got into a casket and was taken in a fake funeral procession to West Point. It's on the river, that West Point, yeah. And I don't know how true that is, but he thought it was true. Anyway, he did escape, and he went to a plantation in Arkansas that his mother had, and then tried to come back a few times to Louisville, but every time he was on the passenger list of an incoming steamer, they would gather at the riverbank and crowd of people and say, we're not going to let him get off the boat. And so that went on. Or he would travel throughout the country, as he always did, and he would sign his name on a hotel registration book in somewhere like Saratoga Springs, and then it was noticed that after he did that, someone came in and wrote underneath his name, murderer. So it was one of the several times that what had happened in the Ward family was national news. Perhaps the first time it was national news was when Sallie wore the Turkish outfit in, I think, 1846 in Newport, Rhode Island, and she was so beautiful that they had to write about it. It was a social note, and was then picked up by other papers. And then another time was after her sister Malvina in, I think it was 1845, 46. The Mexican War began in what, 46? Okay. So in the spring of 46, Malvina eloped with Colin Throckmorton, brother of John Throckmorton, and son of the Throckmorton who ran the Galt House, who had followed her to Philadelphia, where she was perhaps in the same French finishing school that Sallie had been in, that I mentioned earlier. And he set up for her to step into a carriage, and the carriage would take off, and he would be in the carriage, and then they'd run off and get married right away. That's how you elope, you know. Forget the stuff about a ladder at the window. It's more efficient. And that became national news, and so Malvina was nationally famous, but then Sallie had to do something, I think, to bring the spotlight again to her. So when Malvina came home, and about this time in May of 46, there were Kentucky volunteers going off to fight Mexico, going off to Texas. And she was picked, to her good fortune, to present a flag that the young ladies of Louisville had made just for these soldiers to take with them. But then she picked up that idea and then had quickly made a banner for those Kentucky volunteers with the name of their unit on it, which she then presented to them at what's the name of the place where the steamboats after the rapids? Shippingport or something like that. There's another name, right? But anyway, basically on the Shippingport or Portland it was called sometimes. No? Anyway, doesn't matter. And so she presented it to them, and they cheered their banner. And she later said it was a very important moment for me. It was better than being the belle of the ball. And a year later, they come back. In the meantime, they have flown that flag and would have flown the banner, but it was too heavy, in every battle. And they thought that she was protecting them because the flag they were fighting under was the one that she had given them. And they wrote about it, and it was picked up and discussed in the Louisville papers. So then, a year later, they come back, and they present her the flag and the banner that she had presented them. And there's a wonderful portrait, illustration of that from the Ladies' Home Journal of 1901 that I have in my book. If I had a slideshow, I would show it to you. Of standing in front of her house, she's sitting on a horse, because she didn't know they were coming, but she was going out for her horse ride. They got her in time, and there's all these men, and they're soldiers in uniform. They've taken off their hats, and they're bowing to her. It's like a religious moment, and giving her back her banner. So she got national acclaim that way. Of course, it wasn't the only time such a thing happened to other young women. It was kind of a thing to do. But I brought up those two stories because I wanted to say that Sallie would repeatedly, or her brother, was in the national news. Certainly her divorce was in the national news, and that's why that was what I quoted from memory from a New York newspaper about a woman from Boston and a woman from Louisville and from the East and from the West and so forth, because her divorce was news. And in October, I think, of 51, the year after her divorce, she married Robert Pearson Hunt and would have lived happily ever after had it not been for an inconvenience called the Civil War. And his allegiance was Southern and hers was Union. So he left and joined the Confederacy, and she returned to Louisville and talked out of both sides of her mouth, depending on who she was talking to. But basically, Lincoln thought she was pro-Union and loyal, so that when she wrote Mary Todd Lincoln, in what, maybe 64 anyway. It was as after the Mississippi River ceased to be blockaded, to get permission to return her piano from New Orleans that her mother had given her. It was very important. And Lincoln wrote someone in Louisville to saying, okay, do this, because she is loyal. She had the opportunity. I'd hate to split up a married couple, but she had the opportunity to visit her husband, the Confederate surgeon, because he was a doctor, and could have, through John Hunt Morgan, because one of the raids was close enough, I think it was in Paris, that she could have gone over there and visited her husband through the efforts of Morgan, but she refused. And so Lincoln thought, well, that shows she's on the right side of the war. It's unfortunate for her marriage. But voila. So he gave permission for the piano to return. The story ends sadly. He of her second marriage. He is able, when the war is over, he could return if he wanted. He just had to sign the oath. But he's not doing it. He's like taking the greater part of a year, going from one southern city to another, hanging out his medical shingle, and putting an ad in the paper saying, I'm a doctor. He studied in Paris. He must have been a very good doctor. Paris, France, not the Paris that I live in, but which was where you would go at that time to study medicine, because they had permission to have cadavers, as opposed to here. They didn't have to rob them from the graveyard. But he never practiced in the beginning because he didn't need to. He just had the degree, but he knew how to do it. So we can trace his passage through 2 or 3 different southern cities in 1865-66 before he finally comes home. So I think he was not clear he wanted to get back with Sallie. But in the end, they got back together. And they spent a curious summer at Bedford Springs, which was a watering place, where they would, along with another couple, rent it out and run the place. And it was supposed to be an advantage to people staying there because he was a doctor. Obviously it was. But that didn't seem to work, because halfway through that summer, he was advertising in the Louisville paper that he was a doctor in Louisville. So he was hanging out a shingle in Louisville and had abandoned the Bedford Springs thing, although she was still stuck with that. But then what is really strange is that then he, having gone to Chicago in January of 67, to again try to make money as a doctor, because he'd lost all the money he had because of the Civil War. Then he, when he was quite drunk, either fell or jumped out of a window of his office where he was also living, which was that building. It's still there. It's second floor, but second floor is like as high as the third floor. I've seen the picture, and was found the next morning dead on the sidewalk in July of 1867. So sad. Sallie scraped by. She still had some diamonds, and still had the stock in an oil company that her father had given her. And she moved into a cheaper place to live, the upstairs above a barber shop, and still entertained people there. But she maybe was getting desperate, because she said in the paper that she was going to write her memoirs. Alas, she didn't. But it shows that she needed to make money. So she married her third husband, whose name was Venerando Polizza Armstrong, who was a self-made man from Washington, D.C., who had lived for a while in Louisville, or West Point, actually, as a grocer. And during the Civil War had made his money by selling pork to the Union Army. War profiteer in a way, but it works. And she married him in 1876. And his son was very unhappy because he was going to be cut out of the will. and the will was rewritten so that Sallie would get it. So the son then approaches the father on the street and tries to kill him, but doesn't succeed. However, Armstrong does die less than a year into the marriage of some undisclosed to me illness, but she gets all the money. So she's set now. And her fourth husband is not quite so exciting a story, but he marries her in 1885. He was a wealthy clothier who had not been so wealthy in the beginning. He sold cloth and clothes to the Ward family. An interesting to me thing is that Sallie had one child. She had two children from the second marriage in New Orleans to Robert Pearson Hunt, two children who died early. And one has survived, whose name was John Wesley Hunt. And he became a night editor at a newspaper in New York. And he married somewhat late in life, say in 1893. He was born in 1858 or 57. They had one daughter, whose name was Ruth, born in 1900. And he picked up the family soon after Ruth's birth, his wife and daughter, and moved to England. I'm not sure why. But Ruth grew up in England and became an actress on the London stage, and changed her name to Diana Bourbon, and was an actress in New York City as Diana Bourbon, and then moved to Los Angeles and was involved in the radio industry. But before that, she was involved in the film industry because two of the short stories she published in, I think, Liberty Magazine became movies. One movie I've seen, and having read the story, I can see that there was absolutely nothing in the story except an ocean voyage and a woman who was the protagonist, and the title that survived but that's how that works, you know. It survived into the film. She was a person who would be in a sound studio, directing through gestures through the window actors in radio drama. And then she ran the Burns and Allen show in the 30s and early 40s. And toward the late 30s, she was the producer for Orson Welles in some of his drama. And they had a knockdown drag out, which meant that she was standing up to him, and he in the end respected her for it. But he tried to do things she didn't think were a good thing to do in terms of sound effects. And then she lived to her mid-76 or so, and you can see her on YouTube in The Fugitive. It shows up there in a couple of episodes. Remember The Fugitive? The TV show. And she also was an extra in the Ascot Gavotte scene in My Fair Lady. And I rented the movie so I could see her. And then I realized that's her. With enough makeup that she looks young, which she was not quite at the time. So she had this painting. She grew up with that painting because her mother had it. And she knew who Sallie Ward was. And in 1918, she wore a dress to a royal garden party in England. A dress made from the train that was part of the dress that her grandmother had worn in 1857 or 58 or something when she was presented at court. So she was wearing her grandmother's clothing. Her mother wanted to give that portrait to Louisville, and she, Diana Bourbon, or Ruth, didn't want her to do it, but she had to give in because it's her mother after all. So she had to part with the portrait. And it went to the Louisville Library and then to the Speed Museum. So, the portrait's very important in the story because that was one of the main things that her granddaughter knew about her, was living with that picture. I'm not sure where I am with time, but I'm getting near the end, perhaps. And maybe you have some questions you'd like to try out on me. I might not know the answers.
Was Sallie Ward actually the grandson we're talking about? Did she look like Sallie Ward? Some people said that she was spitting image.
Really? I've not heard that, but I have some pictures of her.
I wondered.
Ha. She is very beautiful. Absolutely. She.
Did she have any reaction to her brother's non-conviction, or
Not that I'm aware of. I think that she was conveniently in New Orleans during his trial in April of '54. In fact, she was giving birth in the next month to a child that died.
did she ever comment on it?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, obviously she was asked. I don't know. I think when her brother, living on his Arkansas plantation, showed up in New Orleans, they were at the theater together. They were in a carriage going down the street together. So they were, still family. Yes, ma'am.
When did Sallie die?
I should have gotten around to that. 1896, I believe. She wasn't very old. She was only 69. It was thought she was going to die 3 years earlier, and her obituaries appeared at that time, and she enjoyed reading them.
So she didn't know her granddaughter's success?
No. In fact, when she died, her son had not yet married. And I think she may have thought he was gay, that he wasn't going to marry, or at least a confirmed bachelor without being gay. But that there seemed to be no daughter-in-law on the horizon. Yeah.
Did she die in Louisville?
Yes, she died at the Galt House. And
Not the present Galt.
not the one on the river, but which I guess it's where it is, right? But yeah.
Did you say did she ever actually live here?
No, she didn't live here, but she visited for the ball, for example, which I didn't really know that story, and I'm delighted to hear it. She opened the ball. She opened the house in that sense.
And then one other thing, did you say, is this the original painting?
No, this is a Giclée print.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great print. I mean, you can't do better. It looks just like the original. I don't know if the original is the same size or bigger or not. Same size, yeah. The other portraits, well, let me tell you about one more portrait, because I always like to tell this story. There's a portrait of her brother, and her brother had married about 6 months before he committed the murder, married a riverboat captain's daughter. And when she's a widow, in 1880-something, she is interviewed, that is Matt's wife. She has this portrait that was done by the same painter of Matt, and he's kind of reddish-faced. She says to the reporter, "That's my late husband." She talked about her late husband and how he died. And he was mistaken for a Union officer because he was wearing a blue coat by a Confederate outfit. Unless there was, well, yeah, that's part of it. And so she points out the painting to the reporter and says, he doesn't look like a bad man, does he? And the reporter, who is the source for the whole interview, the story, that I read, says, no, he looked like one of the old masters portraying Christ. A look of great intelligence in his, in his figure. It's kind of funny. He was in he died fearing and certain he was going to be killed by Union soldiers. It was Confederates, but Union soldiers on his plantation, because both Union and Confederate were in the area, and there was a particular unit of Union soldiers from Illinois, from a town, maybe it's Normal, Illinois, where there was a teachers' college. And unless it was, there's another one I have in mind. Anyway, most of the Union soldiers in this unit are from this town, and they're studied to be teachers. They're educators, and he's afraid they're going to kill him because they would know that he killed a teacher. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.